So again, my name's Dave Apsley. I'm a forester and a natural resource specialist for Ohio State University Extension. And then John is the service forestry coordinator for Division of Forestry up in the northern part of the state. And tonight I want to just do an overview of a program I've done multiple times on woodland management tips that pay. So the first thing I'd like to think about, hopefully folks on board are woodland owners, or at least a percentage of you are, or have an interest in it. But if you do own woodlands, why do you own those woodlands? I really think you should take some time to think about it. What are some of those benefits you hope to get from your woodlands, and how do you plan to get there? I've found as a woodland owner that if you don't really have a plan and ask yourself these questions, 20 years have gone by and you said, gosh, I wish I would have planted those trees or done that crop tree release or treated those invasive plants 20 years ago, and time gets away from you. So having that plan is really important. But it's important to think about why you own them. We talk a lot about timber and cutting timber, but when you ask Ohioans why they own timber or why they own their woodlands, timber comes down fairly low on the list. And most of us own our woodlands because we like the beauty of it, the wildlife, the legacy, something to pass on, privacy, lots of things, but timber is always way down on the list. The only thing lower on this list is NTFPs. And if anybody knows what that is, you can type that in the chat window. But NTFPs, anybody have an idea? They're a fairly small component in most of Ohio, but maple syrup falls under that category in northeast Ohio, and it's pretty big industry up there, but they're non-timber forest products. But look again where timber falls. A little over 20% of the people say they own their woodlands to grow timber. Later on, we'll find a lot more cut timber than that. And that's part of the problem, because you don't think about it as being the reason to own it. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about it until you get the knock on the door. And then that's when a lot of people make a quick mistake. So I really think, even if you own it for timber, think about all the reasons why you own it. Because really, most of us can only harvest timber once, maybe twice in our lifetime. So you want to be sure to do that right and at the right time, and you really want to make sure you do your homework. So the first tip I've got is just think about other options. Why do you own it? What are some personal use things you get? There are other income opportunities. Ohio's a big state, lots of people, and people like to spend time out in the woods. So there's opportunities there for income. A lot of us get forest products from our own property. I burn firewood, and during COVID, I've burned a bunch this year because the wood stove is going constantly. But lots of benefits we can get from our woods. There are things like non-timber forest products, including maple syrup. You've got lots of options, and we're out here to help you to explore some of those options. We've got lots of fact sheets if anybody's interested on things like growing ginseng and some of these other resources out there. A lot of us like the wildlife aspects. I've got a bird feeder. I just love it. And being in a woodland and having some wetlands around really enhances what I see. Great place to raise kids. I raised 3 kids on this property, and that's why I own woodlands. If you're looking for income opportunities, there can be some potential for lease hunting, especially if you're innovative, you use some of the social media and internet to promote it. You can, down here in Southern Ohio, people lease by the acre, and it's probably not too lucrative. But if you're innovative and you provide opportunities to hunt or to bird watch or to camp, you could actually have some income opportunities that way as well. And then the future, who knows what it's going to hold. Carbon, we just don't know, but it's becoming a buzzword here lately. And woodland owners in Ohio contribute a lot to carbon sequestration. We don't get a lot of rewards for it currently, but by just growing trees, we're providing a benefit to other people in the country and around the world. We're providing a lot of environmental services. And that's part of the reason why we get tax breaks sometimes for our woodlands. And then the other thing is producing a sustainable product like timber. So there are lots of options out there. This is probably not super meaningful at this point, but in the South, if you're growing, especially like pines, a lot of the wood products that we get are certified. And if that's something you're interested in, actually being a member of Tree Farm, if you're a member and you follow all the rules, you're actually certified wood product too under a group thing. Right now, it doesn't provide a lot of financial benefit, but it may down the road. My next tip is develop a plan to help you reach your goals. There's an old saying about failing to plan, but really think about why you own your goals, setting some reasonable goals for your property. And what it amounts to is you could spend a lot of time out in your woods doing work, but if you don't really plan ahead, we've only got so much time, we've only got so much money, we've only got so much energy. So having a good plan with some input from John and some of his colleagues or some of our wildlife biologists, soil and water folks, it's going to help you get to where you want to go a lot quicker than just going out there and willy-nilly doing work. And also that plan is really important to get some of these tax break benefits under the Ohio Forest Tax Law, under CAUV, current ag use value. And also if you want to be eligible for some cost share opportunities under EQIP, a plan is important. John, do you want to pitch in on that at all?
Yes, I'd like to say a little bit of something about plans. Division of Forestry no longer writes plans, but we guide people who do. We guide you to the need for them and basically teach you that there are many programs that the plan assists with, or they complement. These programs complement each other. The plan actually allows you to qualify for different programs. And it's good to have something generated and something you can read and refer to as to what you should be doing in your woodland over time to meet your goals. So there's
another real good plan, and I almost always fail, or reason to have a plan, I almost always fail to mention it, is if you're someone who has heirs and multiple heirs and you want them to carry on some of your wishes, having a good management plan that can be passed on as part of your legacy planning, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, really helps to take away the doubt of what your intentions are for that woodlands in the future too. So it's an important piece there too. Just a little bit about a plan. A lot of us, this is my 30-acre property, and a lot of people, when it comes to selling timber and to having a woodland, they don't think about managing their woods other than just the whole property. And I like to use the analogy of, your forest and woodland is kind of like a farm. You've got certain areas that are good for growing hay. You might have other areas you can do row crops on. You might have other areas that you pasture. And there are different soils, different site conditions, different land use. And a lot of times we got different species mixes of trees. And so we don't manage the whole forest property as the same. Like this property here, this is all Virginia pine, or was. I manage that totally differently than I do my oak forest. And when later we get into selling timber, all of your woodland may not be ready for a harvest. Maybe only a portion is. So you need to be thinking about dividing it into these units called stands, and that's what a forester can help you do, and that's a good starting point. You might have totally different prescriptions and suggestions, or even different goals for those different woodlands. So that's an important part. And really all a plan is a description of your property and your forest resources. It talks about your goals and what's your goal for your property, what's your goal for each of the stands. And then really it's just it's a roadmap. It's an activity schedule with suggestions on, based on your goals, here are the things you can do to accomplish them. And so this is a cartoon version, but each stand, a little description of the site, and then what you would do in a time frame for when you're going to get it done. And that's all a plan is. There's a lot more other stuff that goes in there that documents other resources, but it's really pretty simple. Description of the property, your goals, and then the activities you need to do to help get you closer to those goals. Now, to meet some of the requirements for Division of Forestry and for NRCS, you might need a lot more detail than that. But the reality of it is it's really a simple thing. And a lot of people don't have management plans in Ohio. Very few do. This data from the Woodland Owners Survey the Forest Service does says Ohio, 12% of the people have plans. I think that's probably high. That's 12% of the respondents, remember, and probably people with plans are more likely to respond to the survey. So my guess is, John, it's quite a bit lower than 12%, wouldn't you think?
I would think so. I would like to interject a little bit, David, on where people can get plans. You know, I said we no longer are able to have the time to do them, but there's generally two ways that you can get a forest management plan actually written. One is to hire a consulting forester. That's a private consulting forester who can write the plan for you. They'll review the property with you. We rely on them. We work with them regularly on all aspects of forest management. Plan writing is one. And you can pay out of pocket for that plan. The plan then can be used for the tax reduction programs, the cost share programs, the tree farm program, if you so choose. The other way to get the plan, if you don't need it under a certain time frame, is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or the EQIP program. That program is run through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's the NRCS, basically the federal branch of Soil and Water. Currently, they utilize money from the Farm Bill to fund management plan writing. That's done once a year right now in a batch funding. We're in that process currently. But those are the two ways to get a management plan for your property.
Good. Thanks, John. Another thing, it's a tool, and I'm not promoting this to say this replaces a plan that a forester writes for you, but this is a tool that you can use to interact with a plan that you've already got. And it's produced by American Forest Foundation. It's called My Land Plan. It's an online resource for you, and I love it. I highly recommend, if you got a forest management plan of your own, to try to get some of that information into My Land Plan. It's a free website. You can create an account and log on, and it gives you the opportunity to map your property. And you can actually trace around a property. It can tell you the acreage. If you've got roads or trails, you can trace them out. It can give you distances. So if you need to figure out how long your driveway is, if you're getting gravel or if you're building a fence or any of that stuff, but it's a really nice program. We don't have time to go into a lot of detail with it, but it also has the ability to, it's got places where you can set your goals or objectives for the property. It's got places for journaling. It's got places for task and record keeping. For me as a woodland owner, I'm horrible at record keeping. If I scratch it down, I forget where it is. You can put it in here and it will keep track of the task you're going to do. You can set up your plan, like if your forester recommended you do a certain practice, like mark your boundaries by a certain date, you can put that in there as a reminder to yourself. So it's a great way to interact with your management plan. Or if you're a farmer and you just need some way to map your fields and get acreages, and that is pretty cool. You can put dots on there and you can georeference stuff. So it's a neat free software package that is really nice, and it's really not too hard to use. And that's something, my email is multiple places in this PowerPoint. We can put it in the chat window too, but if you want more info on that, I've got some resources for you that I could help you with. I actually got a couple of videos on it that we could share. My next tip is to know what you have and have a good inventory. As part of your plan writing process, there'll be some kind of an inventory that's done. So you'll need it for that management plan, but it just helps you identify your resources. It gives you that baseline. So if you want to know if you've made progress and you've never inventoried, you don't know really where you are. But it also gives you an estimate or an idea what your timber value is. So when someone knocks on your door and offers you some money, you can say, gosh, maybe that's a way off the charts. If you got an idea what your timber, and it's going to change constantly, but if you got a ballpark figure of what your timber's worth, it's probably going to prevent you from making mistakes in the future. And that forester who does a good inventory with you can help you, predict what your future potential is and approximately when it's time to do a harvest and all that stuff. So you'll get part of that as part of the plan, but you might be able to get more detail if you pay a little bit more and get a little more detailed plan, especially getting an evaluation of your timber as part of that. It's also going to help you set realistic goals. For me, I'd love to have had the opportunity to pay for 3 kids' way through college with timber from my property, but my property's been high graded multiple times before I bought it. So that wasn't a realistic goal. So it helps you set realistic goals. It's also something, if you're a fairly new woodland owner and you ever think you might sell timber, it gives you a way to reduce your taxes on your timber sale proceeds. When you sell something, you don't want to pay income tax on the gross. You want to pay it on the net. So when you bought that piece of property, you paid for timber. It might not say in the deed that you paid for the timber, but that lump sum you paid for your property includes the timber, the land, and the buildings or infrastructure you have. So if you can document the percentage of that value that was timber at the time, when you do sell timber in the future, it's going to save you tax money. That's another good reason. And then it helps you, they can do calculations and we can figure out when it makes the most sense to sell your timber based on, you know, it's growing, it's increasing in value, but at a certain point it's going to slow down. So with a good inventory, you can get to some of that. Next quick tip is just, if you're going to spend time and energy and money in the woods, spend it in places where it's going to make the biggest impact. And that's where, a forester will help you set the priorities. Some of our stands are more productive than others. There's tons of things to do. We almost all have invasive species problems. We almost always could use some thinning or crop tree release. So focusing that where it's going to have the biggest impact the quickest. If you're doing it for timber, you want to focus it on your best quality timber sites first because you're going to get the biggest return quickest. So that's just a quick hint on that. I threw a couple slides in here on crop tree because I don't know if many people are familiar with it, but this is an activity with some help from a forester, especially in a little bit younger forest stand, that you can make a big impact. This is a black oak tree that was probably 50 years old when I took the picture. And you'll notice it has no crown almost at all. It was only about 6 inches in diameter and it just died. It had a free to grow of 0. So it's so crowded on all sides, it's not getting much light. So it's going to grow very slow. This black oak growing probably 50 yards away, same age, instead of being 6 inches like the first one was like 15 at the time, inches in diameter. Why? It's got a bigger crown. It's a plant. It needs leaves to photosynthesize. So it has a free to grow of 4. It's got ability to grow. It gets more light. It's got a bigger crown. And based on research done here in Ohio and West Virginia, a tree that's crowded on all sides is not going to grow very fast. But if we do some management, we can double the diameter growth rate of a tree. We can go from less than 2 inches in diameter per decade to over 4 inches, almost 5 inches on average. That's more than doubling in the amount of wood it's going to put on. It's more than doubling in the amount of acorns that a tree can produce for wildlife. We can really pick our best trees and really improve their odds and improve their productivity with a little management. So this is one of the things I really like to do, especially in a young forest. If you can identify those, what we call crop trees, trees that meet your goals, and give them the space they need to be as productive as they can. That's a neat little tool that we've got out there.
Dave, I'd like to interject one thing. When you're talking about, and we'll get into the timber part a little bit later, but Dave is talking about the doubling of the growth. That is board footage, which is that's our unit of measure in measuring timber, and that's theoretically, let's say 144 cubic inches of wood or a 12 inch by 12 inch by 1 inch piece. That is the equivalent of a bushel of corn to a corn farmer. Now we can double the growth and concentrate that growth in the good quality stems by just some educated thinning. And there are programs out there to help you get that accomplished, and vendors who can assist you with the tree selection choices or do it for you. So there are avenues to getting this stuff done. You just got to get familiar with them by giving us a call before you do make these kind of decisions.
What happens is, a lot of people don't think about it, but our forests or woodlands are almost always too dense, largely because of some of the past land use, but there are just too many trees per acre. And when that happens, they all grow a little. But trees that don't have a lot of value are going to grow at the same rate of our valuable trees. And here's an example of a walnut on my property growing next to this maple that has this seam, which is probably going to split and die someday anyway. So it might have grown another 20 years, ate up all that space and then died. The wind blew the top out, and then this walnut may not have survived. But by using a chainsaw and girdling this tree's grown a lot faster. It's got a bigger crown. It's going to produce a lot more value than this tree would have ever produced. So it's a way to kind of help pick the winners and losers and really increase the productivity in your woods. You got to know you need some input from a forester to know which species do the best on the sites and how much to release. But if a tree's touching the crown of a tree that's got a lot of value, it's slowing its growth up. Another tip I've got is protect your woodlands from. Wildfire is not probably a big problem up your way or very often. Down here it can happen. The best thing you can do in this part of the world is just maintain some good access so that if a wildfire breaks out in the area, people have a way to get in there to control it. Observe the burning regulations. DNR has burn bans in the spring and the fall. It's coming up here Monday, I guess, starts into the burn ban season, beginning of March, where you cannot do open burning. What is it, to 6 p.m. is during daylight hours, essentially. So from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. is the only time you can do burning, if you can even do it based on your local community as well. But it's just a way you can protect your woodlands a little bit more. Livestock, we don't see it as much, but a lot of folks in the past have had livestock in the woods, and it can do a lot of long-term damage. It can remove our regeneration, our new young trees, and a lot of times it also favors our non-native exotic species. So really don't recommend livestock in the woods. In fact, Ohio Forest Tax Law, it's not allowed, is it, John?
No, it's not.
Excluding livestock. The other thing you can do too is we can't do a lot about non-native insects. A good example, we can't do a lot about emerald ash borer. But our native insects and diseases, a lot of time the best thing we can do is not have overcrowded trees, but have trees with nice healthy crowns. They're going to have a better chance of surviving an insect or a disease outbreak, especially our native insects and disease. And also encouraging diversity in your woods. If you can, through crop tree management or any kind of management, encourage a variety of species out there, that just gives you a little bit of insurance. All your eggs aren't in the same basket, I guess the best way to put it. And if you've had a woodland that's predominantly ash, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So if you can have a variety of species out there, any insect or disease is not going to wipe you out. And then invasive exotic plants. I've seen there was a question or two in that. We can spend some time at the end on that. But it's especially important to evaluate your invasive situation prior to any harvest or disturbance. Because if you don't control it ahead of time, it's going to explode on you. You're exposing soil and getting light to it, and it can be a problem with a lot of invasive species. Another one that I added fairly recently is from timber theft. Know where your boundaries are. Keep an eye on your property, especially if you're an absentee landowner and you own woodlands, a distance from your property and you're not there all the time. This is becoming a problem statewide. It can be someone deliberately posing as a landowner and selling all of your trees, to a neighbor having a timber harvest and the logger just sneaks across the boundary and takes some of your trees. So be aware of that. If you're not on your property a lot, get a neighbor or a friend to walk that property regularly. If you're on that property, try to walk your boundaries and just be aware. If there's logging in the area, make sure your boundaries are properly marked, and it's just something to be aware of. We had a case a few years back where $2 million was stolen off of an elderly gentleman's property. Fortunately, they finally caught the person and they were prosecuted under elder abuse laws. But I don't think that family or that person ever recovered near what they lost with that timber theft.
Hey, David, I want to reinforce what you said about that. This is becoming a bigger problem. It's more of a problem in the southern part of the state, where you have some absentee landowners. But just to understand, some trees are worth considerable amount of money, and meaning they can be in the thousands of dollars per tree. That's not typical, but they're out there. Walnut and white oak in particular are targets of people sneaking in, cutting them down, and running them to a mill. So it is becoming a problem, and you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and if you can have some surveillance out there, some game cameras can be a pretty good friend of yours too. Down here, that's happening with walnuts along roadsides. You know, somebody might come in and cut a tree down and then come back a couple hours later with the trailer and load one tree up. But like John said, it could be $1,000 right off the bat. So, and being aware of what you've got, having the inventory and having those trees, a value on those will help you if it does happen to you as well down the road. The other thing, this is an ugly boundary, but it's my bound. It's actually looking south from my property. So this is a neighbor and this is another neighbor. But just making sure that boundary is painted and properly marked if there's not an obvious fence. But even in that case, it's good to have it marked. It's like a good fence makes good neighbors. Sometimes a well-marked boundary is really important just because it takes the doubt away. It takes the ability of the logger that's logging next door to say, I didn't know where the boundary was. Well, yeah, you did. It was marked. And it's also a requirement under the forest tax law to keep your boundaries marked. So the next little piece is, we're going to talk a little bit about harvesting trees, but I wanted to mention, if you remember the graph I showed you at the beginning, only about 20% of the people said they were interested in growing and managing timber. But when you look at how many cut trees for personal use and how many cut trees for sale, it's more than that. So a lot of people, you know, why do people decide to cut timber? Think to yourself, why would you make that decision? Especially if you tell everybody up to that point or in your management plan, timber wasn't a high priority. It's a knock on the door 9 times out of 10. Somebody's logging in the area or somebody's out looking at property and you're not ready to have the discussion, but before you know it, you've signed a contract or made a verbal agreement. And John will get into that here in a bit, but it's really important to know what you've got out there, having some idea. And any big financial decision you make, you need to spend some time and plan through it. And unfortunately, it's like that quick sale person, whether it's a car salesman or somebody trying to sell you something that you're kind of thinking about. It's kind of analogous to that. So it's a big financial decision. It could be as big as building a house or buying a house or bigger. So you really want to do your homework on it. And John's got some really good examples of that. Wherever you want to pitch in on that, John. We didn't have a lot of time to rehearse. So,
right. Well, David's right about this. A lot of people don't understand how this business works. Most of these guys, the good operators and the bad operators, and there are both. We've got some excellent operators and we've got lots of really poor ones. Many of them, especially the really poor ones, are excellent salesmen and they're able to talk people into things. And the dollar makes a big difference to people. They don't understand what they're actually selling or the value of it. They don't understand what they're signing. And that goes to Lynn Vogel's initial effort with getting out there in front of marketing timber with the call before you sign. You should just never sign anything until you've done your homework. These operators, when they get a timber sale, they go to all the neighbors who have timber, and they try to buy more that way. That's very common. The good operators and the bad operators watch obituaries, and it's very easy to go on an auditor's webpage and see if that person has what could be some large trees. They just look at the size of the tops on the aerial photograph, and they will send postcards. Sometimes they will blanket send postcards, but they watch obituaries, they watch land transfers. Up here in the Northeast, a lot of people make huge mistakes when a property transfers. If it transfers to the kids or a group of siblings, there's some infighting, or they don't really care. They're not doing their homework, and they really make some huge economic mistakes. That's one of the reasons we are pushing the call before you cut program. Our division, I told you we don't spend the time doing management plans anymore because we're trying to get out in front of these big economic mistakes. It's nothing for us to spend 2 hours on a property and save a guy tens of thousands of dollars in mistakes. I mean, it's
hundreds of thousands. It's not
What's
unheard
that?
of.
Pardon me?
I said, or hundreds of thousands.
We're hundreds of thousands. It's, it's not uncommon. I had 2 visits 2 weeks ago, and in my mind, I think I saved these people 60 grand, the 2 different landowners, just in advice and pointing them in the right direction. So I can't emphasize enough that all you really need to know is what your goals are, and a lot of people don't even know that. So a forester can help you by showing you what your options are, but you should never market timber without the help of a forester. But unfortunately, roughly 85% of the sales that are done in this state are done without the assistance of a forester. So, and the good mills, they buy a lot from foresters, but there's not enough foresters in the state to feed them enough inventory in bid sales where they're supposed to be done. So we have a big disconnect. We're in need of a lot of foresters, and we got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Treat this thing as a commodity.
And John's talked about the financial side, but think about that woodland and all the reasons you own it. And now all of a sudden you can't enjoy it or get those other benefits.
Right.
It's been hammered and the cut was done in a poor way and it's rutted up. And now you can't go for that walk with your grandchild and enjoy it because you're sick over it. So it's not only, it affects your other objectives, it affects the forest's ability to produce that income and those benefits for generations. If it's done poorly and wrongly, it can affect that woods for 100 years or more. So it's not just that cut and the money lost, it's the potential money that could come for your kids and grandkids too. So that's the other piece of it. It's big. And things like getting that forester help to make sure you're thinking about what's going to happen with invasive species or what's the trees that are going to come back. And then it also helps you get a competitive price. And a lot of people sell timber. And if you think about it, if you have anything done, if you're building a house, or if you're getting a major project done, or you're buying something, you don't shop around and ask for multiple bids, and the person you're dealing with knows it's not competitive, you're not going to get close to the price that it's worth. I mean, that's just the way business is. It's no different in any other business. So at minimum, we really recommend you work with that professional forester to mark every tree that's going to be sold. If it's quality woods, put a paint mark on every tree to be sold. Make a list of what you've got and then advertise it so that everybody that bids on your timber is bidding on the exact same trees. And it makes it competitive. It makes it fair. It levels the playing field. And then get bids. Get multiple bids. You should also get paid prior to the harvest and have a really good contract that protects yourself, not just one that a logger puts on a napkin or a piece of paper handwritten in front of you, one that your forester helped develop that protects you and your woods. And then make sure that BMPs are followed. I spent all day today with 8 loggers. We could do it socially distanced in the field, but we're training them how to do it in a way that they're going to minimize soil damage and erosion. So make sure that they're following the regulations and making sure that soil erosion and compaction are minimized. And one way to do that is, I can't guarantee all master loggers are going to do a great job for you. But I can tell you they've at least invested the time to get trained to do it right, and they know how to do it right. The other thing I'll mention, and I don't think I have it on another slide, but do not do a percentage sale. Do not make a deal to say the logger gets 50% and you get 50%. There's way too much that can go wrong. You really don't know what you're going to get until the harvest is done. And you can be on the hook for a workers' comp claim if somebody's injured, a liability issue if somebody's killed when that wood's being hauled, because you're a partner in that business versus just selling it outright, getting paid in full in front. It's their problem in the future. So never sell on a percent sale. I can think of very few reasons why you might do that, but certainly don't do it without the advice of a good and trusted forester that's helping you. Almost always do a mark the trees, have bids on the trees. We call it a sealed bid sale, and make it competitive. I love this slide I stole from Penn State. Mike Jacobson over there is a forest economist. But a lot of times a buyer is just going to say, I'm going to cut all the trees over and pick a number, 14 inches, 16 inches. And a lot of times they're talking about the stump. But a lot of trees are cut about here nowadays. And if you look, this is the price per board foot that John talked about. So this tree down here that goes to a paper mill is worth half, each board foot is worth half as much as one that makes a grade 2 log, which is worth half as much as, you know, and it goes up the scale. So these could be worth pennies per board foot, and these can be worth dollars per board foot. And if you cut too early, you're missing that opportunity. Just by letting that tree grow another year or two, might put it into another class, which may double its value just by waiting a year or 2 or 5. So knowing the time to cut based on when it's getting the potential to be worth a lot more per board foot is really important. And that's where a forester can help you. Sometimes the best thing to do is wait on that cut for 5 years. Or only cut trees that are in the right stage. So that's another piece of advice.
Yeah, David, I'd like to interject with the local group here and tell them, you know, what's going on in the Northeast. You heard Dave say that a lot of times buyers are going to make the tree selection based on the diameter. That's a lazy way of doing things, and it doesn't work. And you know, when we talk about diameter as foresters, we're always talking about the diameter 4.5 feet above the ground. In many of these contracts, you'll see acronym of POC, which means a point of cut. And as you know, the lower you go on a tree, it's pretty easy to get a pretty wide cut. So you're basically giving away the whole set of trees. Up here in the Northeast, the other thing is we just have a culture where people have been using portable sawmills up here for years. This is not done anywhere else in the state. And my old territory, 2 hours south of here, there were none. We never saw one. But it's common up here. A lot of people sell. We've got a pallet industry up here. They're cutting these trees out in the woods, leaving the slabs, leaving the sawdust, and a lot of potentially grade lumber of trees that could be worth far more in several years are being cut and put into pallet stock. That's just common up here, and it's because landowners don't do their homework or don't call before they make some mistakes. So, you know, I just can't stress enough the need to understand what you own before you sell it. It's not very hard for us to make a determination based on what you need, what you should be doing with your.
Yeah. This publication is great if anybody wants to look it up, and I can share some more slides at another time, but it talks about a 12-inch cherry tree, and he might get the math on it. And just by waiting until it got to a 14, it doubled in volume, so it doubled in value. But once it jumped to a 16, it doubled in volume again, but each board foot was worth more than double per board foot. So it quadrupled in value by waiting that little bit of time. And then another 10-year period, or I think it was 7-year periods he was using, then it just went off the charts. So by waiting just a few years, like 20 years, this tree went from $30 to $300 and some dollars. So, and you know, and there's other examples, and I'd love to do that for some Ohio trees to just show by waiting and getting into these higher quality trees, it really makes sense. And with good management, you can probably speed that process up even more and increase your value even more.
Right now, if you think of this as a commodity, a crop you're growing, some people, there are a lot of farmers don't think of it this way, and they don't put a lot of stock in managing their woods at all. But if you're growing it faster and concentrating that growth in a higher quality stems, yes, your interval of harvesting is nothing like an annual crop. But when you do forest management practices, you know, a thinning lasts for a long time. You do it once or twice through maybe 3 times until your trees are in the saw timber size class. A lot of people also don't understand it takes 80 to 100 years, maybe a few more, to get the woods into that medium and large saw timber size class. So, but once you get it there, you can kind of keep it there. But you're growing board footage per acre per year, and there can be a dollar value put on that. And it's a crop without nearly the same effort and inputs that go into a traditional crop. So we are working with Farm Bureau now quite a bit to get their members educated on the fact that this is an ag commodity. And we're making some progress there. We're working with a lot of partners up here in the Northeast, Holden Arboretum, the city of Akron, Cleveland Metro Parks. They are all doing some commercial cutting and doing some research and trying to get their woods good and healthy and well taken care of. Now, Metro Parks is just getting started in that. Holden Arboretum, for those of you who are interested, they are very much sold on the forest management, the effects it has, because they're doing the research. So in time, once we're all able to get into workshops in person again, those are some places we will be having workshops.
The other thing, it's a good investment, timber. I mean, a good managed forest, probably between 6 and 10% increase in value on an annual rate. So, you know, you might be a little short of money today, but you might be able to borrow that money and let your timber grow and come out way ahead financially.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, if you're getting paid in full, if you goof up and sell it for half the value, you're really hurting yourself. If you think about it and you get a good forester to help, you might be able to sell half as much timber, have more down the road that's even going to be worth more. So just be careful, do your homework. You may be surprised how much value we have out there. And you've owned it for a long time. Your family's invested in it. You're paying taxes on it. And it doesn't make sense to give half of that value away when you sell right off the bat. And a lot of times you're giving away a lot more than that. So in Ohio, we started a program. It actually started in Athens. They started with a little brochure. And the whole purpose was to say, here's a bunch of resources to help you. And it was phone numbers. In about 06 or 08, Ohio went statewide with Call Before You Cut. And then we got a little grant and we added West Virginia, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri fairly quickly. And a lot of that work was done by Division of Forestry and Extension partnership. So we've got a web page you can click on or call an 800 number. You can get Don Karras, who's always entertaining to talk to, isn't he, John?
Yeah.
Or you can click and get resources, request info across the top here. I'll get an email, Don will get an email, and we can send you a packet of information that's going to just things to think about. The process we recommend for selling timber in a lot more detail than we can go into tonight. So it's just a great free resource. And then you can also call John and get contact with your service forester to make sure that you're getting some help before you leap in too deep. John mentioned foresters. Where do you go to find a forester? What is a forester? What's it take to be a forester? You just wake up one morning and want to be a forester? Well, in Ohio, you could do that and call yourself a forester and legally get away with it. But John and I invest a little time and energy and money into getting forestry degrees, and we think there's value in that. That's our expertise. That's what folks on this list have forestry degrees. So they have training, they have different expertise sometimes, they have different backgrounds and different experience, but at least the standard at this directory page is people who have forestry degrees that help woodland owners like you. So we've got consulting foresters who are the people that you would talk to if you're having a timber sale for sure. They would represent you in that process. They would be the ones that would help you or mark the timber for you and prep for that job, advertise that job, oversee the job, and all the steps that are involved. And yes, you're going to pay for that. But there's plenty of research out there to show that even though you're paying that consulting forester a commission, you're going to take home more money and have more value left in your woods when it's over. Doesn't seem possible, but they're doing their job. The reason that can happen is because they're making it competitive. They're forcing that process to be competitive. They're not cutting trees before they're prime. And then also, a lot of times they're taking out poor quality trees to make room for future growth. So you're getting lots of benefits by paying that consulting forester to help. So if you're interested in finding a consulting forester in Ohio that's a member of the Society of American Foresters, this is a place to go. I think John has a shorter list, so they've gone through this same list and shortened it with people that are in the northern part of the state.
Well,
We also list, go ahead.
And this site just went live maybe a month or two ago, and it's filterable to the Northeast Ohio guys. I'll just tell you that we continue, myself and the other foresters on my team, continue to look for people with forestry degrees and tell them about the opportunities to learn how to consult, writing management plans, conducting timber sales, and doing timber tax basis work. So I'm always looking for somebody to train how to do this. I work with all of the consulting foresters in this region on a regular basis. We talk, I would say, daily, not with all of them, but with somebody. And, you know, there is occasionally some balking of a landowner thinking, well, I got to pay him 10% or whatever. Believe me, when you get competitive bids, you save a ton of money, and the correct trees are chosen for this particular sale. I've seen, you know, consulting foresters are not going to even offer the bid packet to any bad logging companies. They're going to have their they're going to send it to the best guys who are going to abide by the contract and, you know, get those guys competing. It is not unusual at all. I did this for a while. It is not unusual at all that even after you've weeded out the bad guys, even the good ones are going to throw bids with a wide range. If somebody needs what you've got for sale and they know they're competing against it, they're gonna pay for it. You know, as a consultant, you never know. It's very difficult to figure out who's going to buy any particular sale. They'll surprise you. And I know one of the common practices of consultants is, as a common courtesy, you call everybody who bid, every company who bid, and you let them know who got the top bid. And invariably, when I did that, they would tell you, they would ask, where in the world is he selling that? So there's competition. It's just the right way to do things. I can't emphasize it enough. We see horror stories all the time and hear them all the time. So please do your homework. I like to be the first boots on the ground if I can be, because I need my consultants out marking timber. I shouldn't say my consultants, the consultants out marking timber. And I'll do the preliminary assessment to see if the property can benefit from a sale. So
if the timing's right and it makes sense.
Right.
So, and so John mentioned him, John and the state service foresters are also, this is probably the easiest place to find all those contacts. So you go to this osafdirectory.com or just type in Ohio Forestry, you'll find it. And then you click on this state service forester and all the map and the directory of John and the people that work under him in northern Ohio are going to be listed there too. So that's where I would start almost always. And then I would go to the consultant once you've decided to sell, then go to the consultant to get the package put together. And one analogy I like to use, and I haven't used it yet, so I'll throw it out there. Think about going to an auction and you're the only bidder. Or in reverse, thinking about having an estate sale and it's an ice storm and you go through with it, and there's only one bidder. What kind of prices are you going to get for whatever you're selling? Your car, your house, If it's not competitive, you're not going to get a competitive price. So we do list industry foresters on this site too. I did a training today on BMPs, and there were 4 of them there today. 2 of them were students of mine at Hocking College. They're great people. But realize if you're dealing with an industry forester, that's a forester that works for a company that's buying timber or growing timber or doing something. So they're great foresters. They can be great for advice on how to plant trees and how to manage trees. But when it comes to bidding on timber, they're not representing you, they're representing the company they work for. So the consultant is the person that you hire, no different than an accountant or a lawyer, to represent you in the process. An industry forester can be a perfectly good forester and maybe one of the ones that buys it, but they are not the person you want to negotiate with on price or be involved with there. You want to deal with the consulting forester in that arena. Anything else on that, John, or do you think we beat that?
Well, on that in particular thing, they don't like me when I say this, but when you're buying for a company or an industry forester, and there are some really good guys out there.
They're all guys and gals. There's some wonderful.
But they're a timber buyer with a forestry degree that knows how to grow trees. I had a situation last where a buyer who's not a forester, did a really nice job marking and the tree selection. But I still told the landowner, yeah, I know. I mean, he did a nice job. I agree. But he's giving you one price. And you need 10 of him competing with each other to get the right, the best price.
And it's not like corn. We talk about it as a commodity in some respects, but the quality of timber and species, there's so many variables. Mm-hmm. And somebody might need what you've got worse than somebody else. And if you're a cabinet manufacturer and you've got an order that you've got to fill down the road, and you got to produce so many cabinets out of red oak, and you don't have it, and it's going to shut down your production line, you're not going to take the risk of losing the stand of red oak out there. So you're going to pay more for it. Doesn't mean the person down the road's trying to cheat you. They just may not need it as bad, or they might not be as good at marketing it. So getting that competitive is the best approach. And it's no different than if you're, getting anything else done with a contract. Getting multiple bids is always a good thing. Doesn't mean you always have to take the highest one, but at least you know what that range is. And I've seen it. When I was a forester at Fort Knox, we had timber sales. And I remember one sale in particular that ranged from $30,000 to $150,000, the bids that came in. I know a landowner down this way who bought a piece of property, and it connected his property and his dad's property. It was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, and he couldn't afford it. And he said, I need to sell some timber real quick. And I said, well, at least get 3 bids. And his first bid came in at $30,000. He's like, man, that's going to go a long way to pay. I paid $90,000 for the property. It's going to go a long way. And this was 15 years ago. So now those numbers are probably triple. But he said, $30,000 is a third of the price of this property. What do you think I should do? I said, get some more bids. And he got another bid that was $38,000, and the final bid was $90,000. So he got enough off of that sale to pay for his property. And he was thrilled to get a third of that, but he just didn't, know that. So that's just an example of how widely ranging those prices can be.
Yeah, I did want to point out quickly, Dave, we do have resources to understand what the pricing trends are doing. There's a Hardwood Weekly review, or Review Weekly, that comes out actually every 2 weeks, I believe, where we can watch the trends of prices of lumber and what it's doing. So it's not like we don't have an idea if we mark 30,000 feet of black cherry in a sale, how much it might go for. We have a general idea. So it's not like it's a unknown thing. There are resources we have.
Yeah, you got a ballpark anyway.
Right.
So I just noticed the time got away from us quick there on the last couple slides. We were moving good, now we're behind. So I want to keep it moving. The other piece of advice I'll give you is keep informed. Know what's going on out there. There's all kinds of invasive insects and diseases. Down here, we're having problems regenerating oak. Timber markets change. If you got a lot of cherry and the prices are high, then maybe you want to sell cherry. But if they're low, maybe you want to wait till the prices come up. So just follow timber prices. That could be huge, just knowing that. So keep informed. I'm going to skip this one. There's lots of resources out there. The Ohio Tree Farm Program is one place you can get information. They've got a wonderful Woodland Journal, which Division of Forestry helps support big time. Just a great resource. Ohio State University Extension has the Woodland Stewards Program. We've got fact sheets galore. We've got web resources for you. So this is out of Columbus, the Woodland Stewards Program. And all the forestry and wildlife publications can be found here. So woodlandstewards.osu.edu. I tend to program down here in Southeast Ohio a lot. So I have a program, and we usually do all day live programs. So it's tough for someone in your county to come down to Vinton County to a program. But now we're doing a lot of stuff virtually. So this site has got some resources. And one thing you might be interested in are some of these recordings. We've got recordings that are an hour long to get into timber marketing and selling timber in a lot more detail. I've got recordings on how to make measuring stick and measure trees. We've got chainsaw safety stuff. And then we've got this tree ID link where we've got almost 40 3 to 5 minute videos on how to identify trees and some of their benefits. So there's lots of good resources out here at this page as well. So our next program coming up is on trees and shrubs for wildlife. It's on March 12th, but it'll be by Zoom, so you can join us. Legacy planning, I wish we could talk about, but do your homework and really start thinking ahead about what you want to happen to that woodland after you're gone. It's a tough topic, but it's something you need to talk to your heirs about. You need to work with your financial planners and your lawyers to make sure that your wishes for that property carry on into the future. And maybe you can prevent some of the issues that heirs have when it comes to, gosh, how do we keep the property because of the tax bill? You can pre-plan and avoid a lot of problems. Also I never can come up with a short URL for Division of Forestry. So the best thing I can tell you to do is do a Google search for Ohio Division of Forestry and click, because it's too long to put on here and get anybody to copy it. And then I think with that, we'll probably stop and take a few questions because we're right at 7:30. So Lynn and Anthony, and I don't know if we want to officially wrap and shut off the recording and then take questions, or how we want to do it. That's up to you.